Hi, my name's James. James Loves Games. Welcome to the show. Welcome to podcast JLG Pod. What is this called? I don't even know. JLG Pod, episode 6. What makes a good game? And this is the topic that a lot of people have made careers out of. A lot of people, myself included, have tried to answer this question. And really, there's no answer. Spoiler alert, there's no real answer. No. I'm going to talk about it, and it's a tough one. It's hard to answer. I think when you're taking any sort of artistic or creative endeavor and trying to put a number score on it, or trying to rate it, or trying to rank it objectively, something that everybody can agree with, you're going to have a very difficult time, because these creative endeavors are necessarily very much subjective, meaning it's going to be different for everybody. What one person sees as a great game, another person is going to see a different game as a better game, just because of your own sensibilities and your own opinions and your own personality and things like that. James Gowan, what or who from Software makes a good game? They do make a good game. Dwayne Johnson, good morning. An interesting topic today. Thank you. So as I try to sort of grapple with this, there's kind of this standard that has appeared over the years in judging a game. And of course, I'm talking about video games. James Loves Games applies to many games, but today I'm specifically talking about video games. What makes a good video game? There's this typical kind of review structure where some broad general topics are discussed, like graphics, music, gameplay, and things like that. And whenever I've done game reviews in the past, typically what I've done is discussed graphics, the visuals, audio, gameplay, replayability. And it's okay. It's a good way to sort of cover all the bases and give your opinion on each of these sort of aspects of a game. And you, as the listener or the reader who's kind of maybe perhaps on the fence about whether you want to buy the game, because games are expensive, they take a long time to get through, and so it's a good idea to learn whether that's going to resonate with you, if it's going to be worth your time and money. It's not just you pay $10 and sit in the movie theater for 2 hours and then that's your experience. It's like you're going to pay $60-$70 and potentially play this thing for over 100 hours. You should probably make sure it's something that you're going to be into. And so you'll try to find somebody who's sort of on the same page as you, game-wise. You'll try to find a game reviewer or some kind of media outlet that gives out entertaining reviews or things like that. And so that you can kind of say, well, this person's tastes are more in line with my tastes, and so I'll probably agree with them on this one. If they say it's that they liked it and then it was good, then I will probably like it too, and so on. And so, but it takes time to sort of develop that, what would you even say? Playlist of game reviewers that you can agree with so that you can find a good way. But, it's tough because games are just different from everything else. It's not something that you are just sort of witnessing. It's not something that you're just listening to. It's not something that you're just watching. You're not a bystander when you're experiencing a game. You are an active participant. You are moving it forward. You are playing it. You are actually doing the thing. It's a lot different from just sitting and watching a movie or just listening to an album. There are many, many more layers to it. And so, at the end of the day, it kind of gets down to What's your preference? And so I'd like to kind of go through some different categories to kind of go over, break down, is this something that we can all agree on is what makes a good game, and so that we can start from there. If somebody's going to make a game, if they can start with these sort of foundational principles, then it'll probably end up pretty good whatever direction they take it. And so I think as a definite baseline, um, there has to be some intentionality in what they're making. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you look at a game's graphics, there are many different metrics with which to gauge whether a game has good graphics, whether a game looks good. And I think at a bare minimum, any game that comes out these days, it has to run well. It has to operate according to the intention of the developers. So, and the expectations of consumers. So, for example, if you buy a game these days, typically, it should run at 60 frames per second if it's a big 3D game. Or if you've got like a high fidelity mode, it should run at 30 frames per second. If you get a big new sort of modern style 3D game and it's really twitchy and janky and runs at like 15 frames per second, you're going to say it doesn't look good. You're going to say it doesn't run good. Like, that's across the board. I think most people would agree with that. I think as a baseline, the game should function up to a certain standard that we've come to expect. Now, if the intention of the developer is to make it run all janky and slowly for a reason, is this related to the story? Is this supposed to elicit a certain reaction out of the user? Which begs the question, are games art? And I think that absolutely a lot of them are. Some of them are, some of them aren't. It's just like anything else. You've got, movies are art, musical albums and songs are art, video games are absolutely art. You've got these ideas and these concepts that you want to communicate to other people that you're trying to elicit some kind of emotional response with, and the definition of art is even one of those things that I think a lot of people can debate about and disagree about. And it's probably different for everybody. But for me personally, was this made with the intention to elicit some kind of emotional response from the viewer or the player? And if so, then it's art. And, perhaps if it doesn't really elicit much of a response from you, maybe to you it's not art, or maybe to you it's not a good game. But, the intention matters. So going back to the graphics debate, I mean, that was kind of a more performance issue. But like, if you look at graphics, most modern 3D area games that you get these days, they have a certain graphical fidelity. And a lot of times the goal in developing the game is make it look as realistic as possible. Give these people faces that look like real human faces and lighting that looks like real natural lighting. And so with that intention in mind, whether they can achieve that will determine if the graphics are good. So for example, something like The Last of Us Part 2, very kind of photorealistic graphics, real looking people, real looking environments, real looking things. I feel like they did a really good job of capturing all of that, and the character models and everything in that game looked really good. And so the motion of it was really good. It performed really well. The lighting was really natural. The environments were very realistic. It was very good. It was what I would call a game with good graphics. And I think a lot of people would probably agree with me. But what if you looked at a game like Undertale? Okay, it's mostly even in black and white, pixelated, 8-bit. It doesn't even look like it wouldn't even look good on a Nintendo, right? It looks very basic and simplified. It looks like it was made in 1980 something. Okay. Does that mean the game has bad graphics? Absolutely not, because there's an intention there. This is the visual style that the developers were going for when they made Undertale. They wanted to evoke a certain feeling with the visual style and the color scheme and everything like that. Color really mattered in that game. Okay. You got black and white, and then you've got red. And so there's kind of a meaning behind it all. And so could you say that it has bad graphics? I think some kind of real cynical people would say, yes, it has bad graphics. Why would I play this pixelated bad graphic game? I think to the untrained eye and to maybe somebody who doesn't have a very sophisticated view of games as art would probably take that viewpoint. And, it also depends on what's your priority. Do you want your game to be like art? Do you want it to look real? You could say the same thing about paintings. You could look at, if you compared something like the Mona Lisa or some other Renaissance paintings that kind of prioritize using painting techniques to make something look very real, like a real person with real lighting, versus something more modern, like a Jackson Pollock painting, which is essentially just like swirls of paint dribbled over a canvas that looks like giant blobs. So it's like, which is the better painting? Well, it depends on what are you looking for? What's going to capture your attention and give you some kind of response? It's very subjective. And so it's hard to compare a Jackson Pollock painting with something made by Leonardo da Vinci, because they're both sort of masters of their craft, but what they're trying to do is very, very different. And so you can't really say this one looks better than this one. You could say this one looks more like a person, obviously, because it's painted like a person, and this is just colorful swirls on a canvas. But, they're both art, and they're both highly regarded in the art community because of the intention behind them. And so, when it comes to graphics, and really when it comes to all the categories of these games, the intention matters a great deal. If you just slap it together and it looks just sort of half-hearted and like they sort of lazily put this thing together, you're gonna know. It's gonna shine through. So, you kind of have to look at things with that in mind. A popular game that's come out recently is Baldur's Gate 3 on PC. And it has very good graphics. If you look at, in terms of realism. So whenever you watch a cutscene or you zoom in on some of these character models, they're very high fidelity. They're very lifelike. Even all the like fantastical creatures and races and things like that, they have this realistic quality to them. And I think most people would agree that it has good graphics. Are the graphics as good as something that's more of like a third person action adventure game, like The Last of Us Part 2? I would argue that no, they don't. But at the same time, you've got a third person action game versus a top down CRPG, which, CRPG is meant to be played sort of from an elevated viewpoint over a field of players walking around. And so if you zoom all the way in and say like, well, they don't look as good as the character models in The Last of Us Part 2. Well, this isn't how these characters are supposed to be experienced. This isn't how you're supposed to observe these things. And so even if they're not, as realistic looking as the characters in The Last of Us Part 2, there's a reason for that. And maybe that's an unrealistic expectation if somebody were to make that observation, because they're trying to do different things. And so these are all things that really should be kept in mind when evaluating things like this. Dwayne Johnson says, I just want to mention that a letdown with what's happening with Red Dead Redemption just being remastered. Oh, I totally agree. Getting a port for PS4, PC, no remake. I totally agree. I think, and there's, I'm going to touch on that a little bit. The sort of art versus commerce argument that often comes up in these types of discussions, but like that's a money move, 100%. I really do believe Red Dead Redemption 2 was an amazing game that uh it crushed it all in terms of like graphics and music and tone and acting and story and gameplay and the open world aspect of it, the adventure of it. You really felt like a cowboy. It was a fantastic game when it came out. Um, you know, porting a game as old as that to new systems for $50, I think they want for it. I mean, this is money grabbing. This is greed at its finest. You're not doing nobody was asking for this. Okay. And that's just, you want to make money. It's still a good game, but that's just, that's, what I see that as is we're working on Grand Theft Auto 6. We need some cash flow. We need a little injection of cash. And so we're going to bust out this port of a really old game and hopefully get something out of it so that we can continue working on Grand Theft Auto 6. That's what I imagine that decision is. And so, yeah. Uh, but, so intentionality to me is key in all of these categories, including graphics. And so you can't compare something like I said, Undertale with The Last of Us Part 2 or Stardew Valley with Elden Ring. They're trying to do different things. They're trying to evoke different styles and things like that. And so comparing like a pixel art 2D game to a hyper realistic 3D game is not really fair because they're just different. They're different things. And so you have to look at things through the lens of intentionality. So yeah. In terms of like music and audio, same thing. Um, there's been for me personally, um, as far as music, I kind of have maybe unrealistically high standards for game music specifically, just because most of the music that I listen to, if I have time and I need something in the background, it's probably some kind of game music. And so, um, I've been playing games my whole life. I've been listening to game music my whole life, and uh, I've got some high standards, and I need that music to be really really good. And what I mean by really really good is it has to capture sort of the emotion of that moment in the game. It has to really capture that moment, but at the same time, there should be some sort of thematic elements throughout the soundtrack that bind it all together, and it should just be catchy. Like I like it. To me, that's sort of like one of the key things in a game soundtrack that really sticks with me is like it should be catchy. Um, the soundtrack of Elden Ring, I think, really captures the mood of the game perfectly, and it obviously like thematically it fits really well with each other track wise. But I could probably only think of like maybe one, two, or three different Elden Ring songs off the top of my head and what they actually sound like. And granted, I haven't listened to the soundtrack for Elden Ring as much as other games, but it doesn't have that sort of hook, that catchiness, like something like you know, Xeno Xenogears or Xenoblade Chronicles or Chrono Trigger or Castlevania Symphony of the Night or even, Breath of the Wild. These games sort of have that hook that drags you in. And but again, that's just sort of my take on the music. Um the you don't want to have something just like irritating in the audio. Like intentionality is one thing, right? But like at the same time, this should be a pleasing experience, right? If I play a video game, I should be enjoying it. And whether, back to sort of like art, the games as art discussion, like if your intention is to make the player feel uncomfortable or irritated, you're going to play some irritating music or something to give them that feeling. I'm probably not going to like it. I'm probably not going to like it as a game, regardless of whether it's sort of your artistic intention to do that. Um, but too, like atmosphere is very important. For some games, it's not just about like making a jaunty version of the Chocobo theme. Every time you ride a Chocobo, um, some games like Visage, for example, I couldn't tell you what any of the music from Visage sounds like. If you even played it for me, I wouldn't be able to say if it is or isn't from Visage. But that's a really intense horror game, and the music from that game is certainly going to try to put you ill at ease. It's going to try to make you uncomfortable in a way that heightens the scariness. And I think it did that perfectly. Just talking about that game right now, I'm in the office by myself, and it's making me uncomfortable. Just talking about Visage, I'm glad I can see the door behind me and my little monitor over here. But that game did a good job, music-wise, of setting the mood, and so I would say it did a good job. But if I were going to have to choose between, do I want to listen to this music or do I want to listen to, the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, I know what I'm going to pick. Um, but intentionality again plays a role in that. So there you go. Dwayne Johnson, I totally agree with you 100%. It was a great game, but people getting excited when it was announced and people thinking it was getting a remake from the ground up. Oh, back to Red Dead Redemption. Need a good soundtrack audio through the game. Resident Evil games have good soundtrack, especially the save rooms. Oh, I agree, Dwayne. And that's I'm glad you brought that up because that's a really good example, I think, of both of those things, of both, trying to evoke a certain kind of feeling out of you, but at the same time sounding good and catchy. I've listened to like, if you go on YouTube, there's all these different, video game soundtracks you can listen to in videos people have uploaded. And there's always the like, 3 hours of Resident Evil save room ambiance or whatever. And so it'll just be like the Resident Evil or Resident Evil 2 save room music, or like with rain in the background, or like lo-fi save room music. And I've listened to these videos just because that music specifically is, it's very calming. And if you just put it on in the background, it's very calming and you can kind of focus on your work, and it just sounds good. But at the same time, Resident Evil is so intense whenever you're going around the world. If there is music, I think a lot of the times there's not. Particularly in the older Resident Evils, you're just kind of walking around and you just hear footsteps and zombies moaning. But when you finally get to a new save room or something and you hear that just sort of soft, like piano music or whatever of the save room, it's such a relief. It's kind of like finding a bonfire in Dark Souls, but it's just, you hear that dun 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 dun, and you just oh, thank goodness, it's so relaxing. It's like getting into a hot bath. And so it really, that's one of those like perfect game music moments, the Resident Evil save rooms. Um, so, that's fantastic. But, another point that I can make is, a lack of music. Like I said, in Resident Evil 2, or a lot of Resident Evil games, there's no music when you're just walking around. When you're just going about your business through the level, they're typically not playing music. And that's certainly intentional. That's not something where they said like, oh, we forgot to make music for this. Oh, well, ship the game anyway. Like, it's very much intentional because it's so quiet. It's very unsettling. And if there was music in the background, it would really be kind of distracting, and it would take away from the intensity of just sort of walking around this giant mansion or this abandoned police station full of monsters. and it really makes you feel alone. And I think that was best implemented in Dark Souls, the first one. So much of that game, there's no music at all. And it's something that I didn't notice until I was many, many hours into the game. But like, when you're going through uh, Undead Burg, and you're so hyper focused on just not dying, on surviving. You see a new enemy, it's just every encounter with an enemy is a fight for your life. And so you don't even notice that there's no music until you get to the first boss, and then it's just like and it just like ramps it up, and it's super intense. Like, it's scary enough that you've got this giant, like minotaur kind of boss in front of you, but they crank that music up when you haven't heard any music in hours, and it just really ranks up the adrenaline and the rush that you get and the intensity. And then when you respawn at the last bonfire, it's all quiet again, and you just hear the shuffling of the undead guys walking around near the bonfire. And I feel like they really did a good job. And so, like, the lack of music sometimes too can really set the tone, and if really really give you a certain type of feeling from just nothing. And so I feel like Dark Souls and Resident Evil, two really good examples of that. And yeah, but at the same time, I do like, I'm a big fan of JRPGs, and that would be like a cardinal sin in a JRPG. I think there's got to be a theme song for every single different moment in the game. There's a theme song for this town, there's a different one for this town, and a different one for this town. There's a theme song for traveling between the two towns. There's a theme song for riding a chocobo. There's a theme song for being inside this specific castle. And so it's if you look at a game like Chrono Trigger, there's different music everywhere. Each time period's world map has different music, and even sections of the world map sound different. So like when you're in 1000 AD and you're walking around the world map, it has certain music. And then when you're in Guardia Forest, it has different music. And then when you get to Guardia Castle, it's another song. And so I like that variety that comes from JRPGs, and I think that's why JRPG soundtracks are so good, because they're so robust and they have such a large catalog and variety. And so there's really a song for every feeling that you can feel in the game. But anyway, another one that kind of meshes well into music is really like the sound effects of the game as well. You can have a really cool action game with great music, great graphics, and all of that. And then when you swing your sword, it makes kind of like a goofy sounding clang that kind of sounds off. It can be very distracting. And so to me, that's a question of like, are you living up to the quality here? Are you taking the time to really put some polish into this game and make everything matter? Even the swords hitting each other, or the sound that you make when you hit the ground if you fall, and things like that. But those are all like more technical things that have to do with like the polish of the game, much like the frame rate. This is all just it's all a quality issue, and not necessarily like an intentional issue. Are we really want to convey this feeling of dread whenever you swing your sword and it makes a squeaky noise. It's like, no, that's not that's not a thing. It's like the sword's supposed to sound like a sword, and so you got to take the time to make it sound the way it's supposed to sound, or the way that people expect it to sound. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that. As far as like voices and voice acting and things like that, there's such a range. And again, it kind of depends on what type of game they're going for to some extent. But at the same time, I mean, a lot of this will depend on the acting of the voice actors, and really like the direction that they're going for. I feel like most JRPGs with voice acting, they go way too far. They go too anime with it, and it's kind of over the top and silly, and I can't really take it seriously. And I'm a big anime fan. I'm a big JRPG fan, but I much prefer the subtle performances of games like The Last of Us. I have my critiques of The Last of Us. It wasn't The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2. They weren't my favorite. I feel like they were a bit overrated, but you can't say that about the voice acting in those games. I mean, they were top tier, uh, some of the best in the biz. And so those performances were amazing. And I could say the same high quality exists in like Final Fantasy 16. Not quite as good. Still a little bit. You got a little bit goofy with some of this, but it's nothing like I don't know, say something like Tales of Arise that was pretty good voice acting, but or Persona 5. Persona 5 is a perfect example. I love Persona 5, but I mean, it's sort of what I would call, and this I don't mean this in like a super bad way, but it's just like it's an anime game. It's the character models and everything are based on like a Japanese anime, and so it has that kind of anime look and that anime feel and that anime style, and so it's also got those kind of anime voices, and so where things are just really kind of over the top, over exaggerated, and kind of silly to a certain extent, and I can't really take it that seriously, like I said. Um, but it fits, I suppose, with the mood. But again, I would much rather have something that's more down to earth and subtle that kind of evokes more of how people actually talk most of the time. But again, it's just that kind of goes back to intentionality too. You know, you're trying to evoke the sort of the feeling that you get from an anime and those type of characters and the way that they talk. There's a certain expectation, and if they sort of just came out and were talking you know very seriously and normal, like a game like Spider-Man or The Last of Us or God of War, it would be kind of weird, perhaps. I don't know, but for my money, I feel like the best voice acting performances that I've seen in a game come from Ghost of Tsushima. um, that game made me feel feelings like more, I think, than any other game. It was very emotional, and the performances of those actors really swept me up in the story. They really made it real for me, and not to mention the facial animations, the motion capture. It was so real, and with the way that they did the lip syncing and everything, it was spot on, and it looked so good. And kudos to Sucker Punch too, because I mean they're American developers making a game set in Japan, and so the native language is going to be English, but they also had a Japanese track. And at the original launch, it was only they had the English mouth dub with Japanese audio, which was kind of strange and it didn't really match up. Well, with the update and the DLC that came later, they actually added a native Japanese lip syncing option. And so I thought that's really going above and beyond. Like you didn't have to do that, but you did. And so now it looks and sounds great, whether it's in English or Japanese. And so kudos to them. They did that's still, I mean, that game's 3 years old now, and they still did the best at voice acting and lip syncing and facial animations of any game I've ever played. Um, and as I talk about these things, Ghost of Tsushima is one of those games that really comes to mind as a good game. Um, it's it really checks all the boxes for me personally. But here's another thing: it depends on the sort of experience you're going for. And so when we talk about gameplay, this is where you're going to get kind of the most. It's really the most subjective aspect of gaming in terms of quality. Is this a good game or not? Is this a game that I like or not? It really kind of boils down to gameplay. You can take graphics, and I think most people get like, well, this is what they're going for with Celeste, and this is what they're going for with Baldur's Gate 3. You can take music, and the music fits or it doesn't fit. It sounds good or it doesn't sound good, and the voices and all that. for part of it, it's really just a quality issue. And I think most people can tell, is this high quality or is this not? Is this lazy or did they put a lot of work into it? When it comes to gameplay, this is where you're going to get the most divergence because there's so many different kinds of games. You've got open world adventures like Breath of the Wild, and then you have, creepy, mysterious card game roguelikes like Dismantle. And so it's it's hard to compare games to games, or like Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley versus God of War, like which is a better game? What do you want to play? Do you want to do like a cute farming simulator with a good sense of humor and like relationship sim where you can get creative and make your own farm and try to woo some of the other people in the village, or go fishing, or do all of this other silly, farm sim, relationship sim kind of stuff that's, sprinkled in some nostalgia for good measure. It's very colorful. Or do you want to play this epic action fighting huge monsters cinematic type of experience? The games are hard to compare because they're so wildly different. I personally like both, but I can't say which one is better because they're incomparable. You just like it's a very difficult task to say like this one is better than this one. And so you kind of necessarily have to say, with what they're trying with this game, with the intention here, they're trying to make a big epic action game. And as a big epic action game, God of War is really good. Or with Stardew Valley, it's like they're trying to make a very relaxing farm sim that really hooks you. It makes the time just melt away with its charm and, the way you just get hyper focused on it. And so it's good at what it does. Is the game good at what it does? And so I feel like it's kind of a wasted effort and pointless trying to compare them. It's like, what tastes better, chocolate ice cream or a steak? And it's like, well, what are you in the mood for? This chocolate ice cream is way better than the steak. It's like, okay, can I have both? Can I have one after the other? That would be my answer. Obviously, I want both. Dr. Respect, good to see you. I chose the PS5 PC port after fixing bugs and glitches, but how? Dwayne John says, yeah, that's true, James. I was going to say, as an example, Final Fantasy games with soundtrack music. Yes. Talking about God of War, are we going to go full Ragnarok playthrough? I'd love to watch you play that, James. I did stream some large chunks of it, but I played a lot of it off stream. I think I've got a pretty decent chunk that I played online of Ragnarok. But yeah, gameplay wise, you're going to get the most divergence, and it really comes back down to like, what are you trying to do with this game? And my rule of thumb when it comes to most games, and like whether I'm evaluating whether this is a good game or a not good game, is it fun? Because if a game isn't fun, it's really not a game. It's a chore. It's a task that's just not worth doing. And so to me, like, fun is really at the core of it. And some games really, they're trying to tell a story. And sometimes I want to do that. But for the most part, I want something that's just really fun. And so something like Elden Ring, like, obviously highly regarded by most people as a good game, at least most media outlets and people I talk to, it's very highly regarded in many gaming circles as a very good game. It got Game of the Year in 2022. And so you could look at it and say, according to most people, this is what we would call a good game. And for me, what's good about it is like, it's fun. The action is fun. It's very intense, but like, it's the sense of adventure that you get from Elden Ring. It's the same thing you get with like Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild. It's just this large, expansive world. It's an open world game. And I really dig open world games because I like that sense of adventure. And I feel like Elden Ring captured it the best because there's so much in the world to discover and everything feels new. Everything is a mystery. And there was so much to get out of it because you could just be walking across a field and then you see a cliff. And as you're walking across the cliff, there's a cave. what's in the cave? You have no idea. So you go in and, there's just monsters and treasure chests and other things. And maybe you're walking through a field and a dragon just flies out of the sky and starts attacking you out of nowhere. And all of a sudden you're in a fight for your life and you try to run away or you're going to try to fight it. And so you get swept up in this world that's been created, and that sense of adventure. You feel like you're a hobbit off to destroy the One Ring and save the world. And a game that can really capture that essence that is very captivating, is very good in my book, gameplay wise. But again, I don't want everything to be like that. I don't want every game that comes out to be an open world adventure game, because that takes a lot out of you, really. If you just play 100 hours of a game like Elden Ring and then you play 100 hours of a game like Tears of the Kingdom, you're going to be kind of like, all right, I need something light and quick and fun. I need something like Mario Party or Tetris or something just quick, or Hades, something that I can just zip around in real quick, do a couple runs and move on with my day. And so like the fun factor is really important to me. Is it fun? And so I'm running out of time. I feel like an hour isn't enough to talk about a lot of these topics, but replayability is very important with me too. Is this a game that, first of all, on the first playthrough, am I going to get enough time out of? Am I going to want to play it for the duration of the game? But moreover, am I going to want to play it again? In 5 years, am I going to want to play it again? In 10 years, am I going to want to play it again? And so on and so forth. Like, there's games like Chrono Trigger, which highly regarded as one of the best of all time. And to me, what sets it apart is I can jump in. I've played through that story dozens of times, and I can jump in and do it all over again, and it's still fun. I still enjoy it. I have to jump in every couple of years and just play through it again. And so replayability is important. So I've got, about 18 minutes left. I'm going to go through and talk about what, the media says are some good games. So we can try to get a sense of that. And so I've got a list of the Game Awards Game of the Year ever since the Game Awards have been around. So it goes back to 2014. So if we look at like 2014, the problem with Game Awards and award shows in general is you're necessarily comparing one game to all these other games. And so if you have this handful of games, you have to pick one of them and say, this is the best out of this group, which I've already explained is kind of a futile effort, because if you take something again, like God of War versus Stardew Valley, it's hard to say which one is better than the other. And so that's kind of what award shows are trying to do. And it's not really constructive. It's kind of fun. It's entertainment. It's fun to go in and say like, well, I think this one's going to win. No, this one's going to win, or this one should win because of ABC. And it's fun to have the discussion and do all that stuff. But I wouldn't take it too seriously and say like, well, obviously The Witcher 3 is the best game that came out in 2015 because it won the Game Awards. Okay, well, Bloodborne came out that same year too. And I think a lot of people would disagree with you. I think a lot of people would say Bloodborne is the best game that came out in 2015. And they're hard to compare, games like 2014, you had Dragon Age Inquisition, Bayonetta 2, Dark Souls 2, Hearthstone, and Middle-earth: Shadow of War. Well, a lot of these games are fairly similar, but like Hearthstone, it's hard to compare Dark Souls 2 to Hearthstone, a card game. Like comparing a card game to a 3D action game, like which one's better? It's like, which one do you want to play? I played Hearthstone a bit back in the day, and it was really fun, and I enjoyed it a lot. Same thing with, Dark Souls 2. But it's hard to say which one is better than the other. And so I think the Game Award shows are, I don't know that they serve or any sort of real purpose in determining which one is better. But it's just fun entertainment. It's fun to have the discussion, and it's fun to see that. And I think it's good for people who work hard and do make something that many people agree is the best of its time to get rewarded for that. You know, it's good to get rewarded for your hard work, and recognition is very important. It's good to say, you know, I acknowledge that you worked really hard on this and you made something that really resonates with people. And so to me, that's really one of the kind of core um, functions of gaming award shows, or really any kind of award shows, just to say like, wow, you worked really hard. Good job. You did a great job. People liked it. Um, and I think, you know, trying to say like, well, Elden Ring is obviously better than Ragnarok because Elden Ring got Game of the Year and Ragnarok didn't. It's like, okay, well, they're not really trying to do the same thing. They're similar in some ways, but like they're not they're not on the same they're not playing the same sport. You know what I mean? Um, Moreover, if we go to something like Metacritic, which, you know, boo for Metacritic, just because, you know, putting numbered scores to games, it's the best we have right now. But, you know, looking at the reviews of game releases by user score, and this is like games from all time. Number one at the list is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Highly regarded by many people as a great game, maybe the best of all time. According to Metacritic, it's the best game of all time. But then you go down and look at number two. What's the second greatest game of all time across all platforms after Ocarina of Time? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Now, I would imagine most people probably wouldn't have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 as their second best game of all time. Um, I know I wouldn't. I remember playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 and having very fond memories of playing it, having a lot of fun. But, you know, is it the second best game of all time? Uh, Perhaps not. Perhaps not. And so, you know, you should always take these things with a big heaping of salt, not just a grain of salt, but just like a bowl full of salt, just because these are hard to compare this way. It's hard to put a number score onto something and say like, you did a good job. You got a 99. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time got a 99 Metascore. And so therefore it is better than Baldur's Gate 3, which got a 97. Okay. But if you compare those two games and you look at them and say, you know, Ocarina of Time got a 99, Baldur's Gate got a 97, therefore Ocarina of Time is a better game. Well, graphically, it's not. You know, scale-wise, it's not. Baldur's Gate 3 is way bigger, and there's way more stuff to do, and you can play it for way longer. And it has voice acting, and it has all this other stuff. It's got better graphics. And so I think a lot of people would probably say Baldur's Gate 3 is better because it came out more recently, and it looks better, and it has better tech, and all this other stuff. Which brings me to another point. You kind of have to look at a lot of these games through the lens of like when it came out. You know, Super Mario World is highly regarded as a game as well. And it came out, I think, back in like 91. It was a launch game for the Super Nintendo. And it's a very, very good game. It's one of my all-time favorites. But is it better than, you know, Red Dead Redemption 2? It's hard to say. One came out like 32 years ago, and one came out, you know, 5 years ago. So, you know, obviously Red Dead Redemption 2 looks better. So then does that make it the better game? You know, this is my point. It's hard to compare games, even genre to genre, gameplay to gameplay, year to year, but also like era to era. You can take the best game of the Super Nintendo era, and it's hard to compare it to the best game of the PS5 era because, you know, there's just different tech. There's different things available now that they didn't have back then. And so the best at the time, you kind of have to look at it that way. It's like, well, this is all they could do at the time. So this is what was considered a really good game at the time, even if necessarily, I mean, it's not the best thing today. So, yeah, that's how I feel about that. Dr. Respect asks, have you watched Ratchet and Clank PC port trailer? I have. I've seen the trailer for the PC port. I heard that one was kind of a little janky, that port, mostly because the PS5's, you know, SSD really allowed the game to run super smoothly when going from area to area. And I saw a lot of examples of people having problems where the game would kind of get stuttery and slow down a little bit. And that goes back to what I was talking about at the very beginning, is like, it's a performance issue. You know, your intention is the character goes through these portals and goes from world to world seamlessly, and it's super smooth and looks really cool. When you're not able to do that technically, you're failing at what you're trying to do. And so I feel like obviously the PS5 version of that game is going to be better than the PC version because it does a better job of that. Objectively, you know, that's not really up for, you know, debate. Well, I feel like the PC version is better because ABC. It's like, no, it's the same game. It's just, it runs better on PS5. So the PS5 version is the better version. So yeah. What do you guys think? Let's look at, so game releases by user score. We're going back to Metacritic 2023. So the game's this year. Much easier to compare to each other. When you're talking about best games of all time, you know, my best games of all time includes Symphony of the Night, which came out in 97, Chrono Trigger, which came out in 95, Ghost of Tsushima, which came out in 2020, and Elden Ring, which came out in 2022. So you've got this huge gap between good games. You've got like mid 90s, late 90s, early 2020s. They're all some of my favorites for various reasons, but they're hard to compare to each other. It's just like my own personal hit list, my greatest hits. So when we look at the best user scores on Metacritic for 2023, top of the list is Baldur's Gate 3, and I think they deserve it. I think objectively, you could look at Baldur's Gate and say, like, that is a good game. Why? Because it sets out what it tries to. It accomplishes what it sets out to do. It wanted to make a really expansive, really engaging, fun, top-down CRPG that really makes you feel like you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. It gives you all sorts of choices. It gives you all sorts of character interactions, and it's got just dialogue and cutscenes out the wazoo. But it's funny. It has style. It has an engaging story. It's fun, and it looks good. So it checks all the boxes technically. But I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to, what do you like? Do you like CRPGs? And you'll love Baldur's Gate 3. I've heard it's the best of that genre. It's pretty much the pinnacle of the genre. If you're not into CRPGs, you're probably not going to like it. And you're going to say, that's not a very good game. I prefer Tears of the Kingdom. And so that's really the crux of it all. They're both good games. Like, I think objectively, which makes no sense, I think they're both objectively good games. Subjectively, I think they're objectively good. No, but like, they set out, they accomplished what they set out to do. You know, Tears of the Kingdom is more about, like I said, adventure and exploration and curiosity and creativity, like more so than Breath of the Wild, because you have these new abilities where you can put these things together and make your own little strange vehicles to get from point A to point B, or make these contraptions to fight enemies with. And it stimulates this new kind of thing in your brain, where it satisfies that desire to make something. But it's very different from Baldur's Gate 3, but they're both very good, because they're doing what they tried to do. And then whether or not it's going to be good for you depends on your taste. Like I said, you know, you're comparing Mona Lisa to, you know, Jackson Pollock painting. It's like they're both good for their own reasons. And it's just a matter of which one appeals to you more. Do you want the mysterious realism of Mona Lisa and her strange smile? Or do you want some kind of just really frenetic, emotional, all over the place paint splotches on a canvas? Just a matter of style and a matter of taste. We also have things like Metroid Prime Remastered, which was number 3 on Metacritic's list. And so this is a remaster. It's a game that was good back in 2004, I think, when that came out, Metroid Prime. And they made it better to update the graphics, make it work on modern system. And People love it. It was great. Same thing with Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Complete Edition. They made it for modern systems. Runs better, looks a little better. Uh, it's still a good game. Resident Evil 4, same thing. It's a remake, but it's kind of like a top to bottom remake. They redid the whole thing, and it's a must play. It's very good. And so I don't know. I told you that there was really no answer at the beginning of this episode about what's a good game. And I still stand by that. There's really no answer. It's just a matter. It's just the answer is, well, that depends. That depends on what they're trying to do. And it depends on what you like personally. What I like, to me, it just depends on my mood. But, I really like big open world games. Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorites because it really captivated me in every sense. Like everything really sucked me in. The story, the characters, the acting, the music, the visuals. Like that game had a really good visual style because you had sort of like hyper realistic character models and faces. And the world itself did look good and realistic, but it also had some elements that were a little bit more fantastical and whimsical, like having the wind sort of lead you to certain places. And that game really sucked me in, and it was so fun. Like the action just worked. It was very fluid. You felt like samurai, and you kind of had that creative aspect where you can approach a village. You can approach these enemies in very different ways. You can just call them out and just go full on like sword to sword samurai mode, or you can sneak up on them and use ninja tricks, or you can pick them off from far away with a bow and arrow. And so I feel like that's a really, really good game. And I was kind of bummed it didn't get Game of the Year in 2020. Like looking back at that list, like we have The Last of Us Part 2, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, and Hades. What a year 2020 was. Holy cow. When you look at that list, those are all bangers. Those are all really good games. Well, except for Final Fantasy VII Remake, which... But again, this is my point. Most people, I think, would regard Final Fantasy VII Remake as a really good game. But I don't, because it just rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't really like the action in it. I didn't like the voice acting at all. I hated the dialogue. It didn't do it for me. And that's the thing about it. You can have a game. I know a lot of people don't like Elden Ring. A lot of people don't like FromSoft games because, maybe it's just they think they're too hard. Maybe it's just the action is just kind of dumbed down and it's not fun. I don't know. There's no story unless you really dig for it. Different strokes for different folks. At the end of the day, that's the lesson that we have here. It's different strokes for different folks. But I think the main takeaway that I would like to get across to you, my opinion, what makes a good game is a game that does what it sets out to do successfully. So it makes its intention clear. This is the type of game it's trying to make. And then it successfully executes that. And is it to your taste? And so it's sort of like a good game can be both objectively good and subjectively good. And there's a little bit of both aspects to that. So that's that. Yeah. So what do you guys think? What to you makes a really good game? Let me know in the comments. What is your favorite game? What are some of your favorite games? Or what are some games that you don't like? What are some games that you look at and say, everybody says this game is really good, but I don't like it. I did not like this one. And let me know why. If you didn't like something like God of War or Elden Ring or Ghost of Tsushima or The Last of Us or Final Fantasy VII Remake, these sort of big heavy hitters that are highly regarded as really good, what was it about the game that you didn't like? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for tuning in. Dwayne Johnson says, James, I just want to mention I've been absent in the gaming world and has had to get a replacement TV and was waiting and deciding what to get one. It's coming next week, so I'm going to be getting into gaming and streaming. So look out for them and hopefully you can join. I'm going to stream Lords of the Fallen when it comes out. That should be fun. Nice. I think Lords of the Fallen, I'm very much looking forward to it as well. I think it coming out on Friday the 13th in October. Is that a Friday the 13th? I know it's coming out in October. Maybe I just made that up. No, that one is coming out Friday the 13th in October, which is really cool. So get your spooky hats on for Lords of the Fallen in October. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Like I said, leave a comment, and yeah, I'll see you all next time right here. Oh wait, before I do that, I've been forgetting to do this. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Jack Moore, Turbic 88, The Last Olympian Never Sprite. I apologize for forgetting to do the sponsor role in the past couple of podcast episodes, but there it is. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you all next time right here on... There it is. Have an awesome weekend, everybody. Bye.